Now, what were some things that were happening that were causing some problems? Yeah. Yeah. So Mount Hope was a specific example that was named, and they were kind of trying to push their luck on that. They were trying to gain that territory. Yeah. Yeah. That was the other example, was that they were basically allowing their domesticated animals kind of go into the land, destroy all their crops, and it was kind of like they were pushing their buttons. They were trying to see how much they can get away with, right? When it came to, because at the end of the day, they found that the colonists were trying to make them go to war. Okay, they wanted them to have a conflict so that they had a reason to push back against them. Okay. Are there anything else you guys found when you did the document? Like, do you guys think it was anything on the natives that caused this issue? Anything they did? So, the first document, right, was from John Easton, right? He was a man from Rhode Island official, and he was kind of recounting the acts at the time. And then the other official was from England, right? He was doing an investigative piece to see who was to blame in this. And they both kind of said the colonists were to blame in this incident, okay? So obviously, we already know this event pretty thoroughly because we did the whole worksheet on it. But just to summarize, right, Metacom, also known as King Philip, he saw that basically these colonists were not leaving, right? They were only getting more and more, like population was increasing, and they were only stepping basically through the boundaries in which they had agreed upon, to a point where, especially I think the breaking point was when those natives were hung, right? Remember they had those 3 natives that were hung, and at that point was where a really full conflict happened, okay? Once that happened, they ended up basically going on a full-out battle, full-out war, right? And they killed a lot of people, right? A lot of people died. Generally, they say around 1,000 of the settlers were killed. Okay, now 4,500 natives were killed, but it was a pretty brutal scene. Now, for basically the effect of this was that it had ended really any major threat to New England colonies from native tribes. Right, it kind of ended that sort of threat. And then we're going to take a look at Bacon's Rebellion. Okay, Bacon's Rebellion is an entirely different area, right? This is now in Virginia. So the other one was in New England. This is in Virginia. And just to give you some background, you guys kind of know this already. And so maybe I'll just ask you. What was the big reasons why Nathaniel Bacon wanted to have this rebellion? Yeah. Well, the natives were actually going into the settlements, right? They were kind of, firstly, there was a fur trade going on. And the governor Berkeley was basically had like a deal with the natives that the rich nobles of the area were kind of controlling that trade, okay? Now, Nathaniel Bacon and the small-time farmers and the poor farmers wanted to get in on that because obviously they were poor. They wanted to have more ways of getting income. But Governor Berkeley didn't allow them to. Then on top of that, the native tribes were kind of attacking their settlements. So at the end, the breaking point was where Bacon wanted to lead a militia to retaliate against the native tribes. Governor Berkeley, knowing that he has a relationship with those people, that he didn't want to screw up his money that he was raking in, said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And on top of that, with tobacco really not doing as well as those farmers had hoped, the taxes were also being increased by Virginia because to make up the losses. So not only did they not have money, they could have to pay back these debts that they couldn't, and they're being told not to expand their any sort of economic means. Yeah. Say it again. Yeah, I mean there was also those as well. I think a lot of times you can see multiple reasons why they have increased taxes to pay off a lot of different things that were going on at that time period. I think the document mentioned both. I'm pretty sure the one I gave you guys yesterday had mentioned several things. But generally, we kind of associate those two major things, right? The fact that they couldn't pay back these taxes, and that Bacon wanted to have the fur trade, and he wasn't allowed to. So, obviously, the big thing that happens is they go to war, right? Basically, they lead this rebellion with mainly small-time farmers, indentured servants, the bulk of the fighting force. But it did also include freed slaves and those that were still slaves. Okay. Now it scared Berkeley away. They burnt down the capital. Now the important thing about this is that it ends the whole concept of focusing on indentured servitude as being the major labor force of the area. Right. That's the big thing you need to take away from this. And there's a reason why we spent 2 days on this assignment. Right. Metacom's War is extremely important because it shows that the idea that the colonists were just going to let the natives live and just live in their own areas and that they're divided evenly is completely wrong. And the colonists would only want more as they make more money in producing goods for England. Okay, and it only increases from here. Then Bacon's rebellion is really important because it starts the mass buying of slaves. Okay. It ends the indentured servitude concept, and here come the slaves. Right? That's what this major incident talks about. And then when you look at Unit 2 as a whole, this is probably one of the most important concepts to understand. And obviously we're going to talk about mercantilism soon, but that's the other major thing. Because that kind of jumpstarts a lot of incidents that happen in the next unit. Right? The next unit is going to be really the start of the biggest chunk of percentages on exams. Right? Next one's going to be the Revolutionary period. So we'll talk a lot about that stuff. But this kind of sets the stage for a lot of the incidents that happen later on. Okay? Just in case, you guys know, I have some review videos on here. Timeless history. But let's get started now on some of the colonies. So we only talked about kind of really just the beginning colonies, right? We talked about like Virginia colonies, the Massachusetts Bay colonies. We did mention, obviously, Connecticut and Rhode Island and New Hampshire and all these other smaller colonies. Now we're going to get into the southern colonies and the middle colonies. All right. So let's talk about the southern colonies first. So these aren't going to be long. They're almost going to be like rapid fire because, as I mentioned to you already, and I'll probably say it like 3 times in this entire PowerPoint, you don't have to memorize the colonies, like as in who created them or what year they were founded. The College Board's not going to ask you that question. What they'll ask you, though, is how were their economies different? If you might get like maybe a multiple choice question on that, debating, what's different between this colony and this colony and how their economy and how their regions were different. Okay, and I'll give you just a quick summary of that. The southern colonies were obviously more dependent on labor or farming because their climate was a lot better for it and their land was a lot better for it. Just like how we talk about the Native American regions. The same thing. All right. So when you look at the Carolinas, this was started because it was a gift that was given from King Charles to one of his more favorable, his supporters, right? Because he had gained the throne. Okay. It's official colony, and basically by 1729, you don't have to memorize that, but it becomes an official colony. Then you look at the North and South Carolina, it gets divided. So the Carolinas were one giant chunk and it divided into 2. North Carolina really started out being smaller time farming, okay? They were more self-sufficient tobacco farms. And they had some pretty good harbors, which was pretty beneficial for the English government, okay? It allowed them to have now control over the coastline. And once they gained control of New Amsterdam, they will completely secure the entire east coast of the New World. Okay, South Carolina, on the other hand, first was a fur trading colony, but as they start to expand on the land territory, they end up transitioning into farming more goods like rice and indigo and all these other types of major cash crops. Okay, so and just a fun fact: Charleston was named after the king, King Charles II. They named it after the king. Okay, and that's, you'll notice a lot of times, a lot of these famous cities were named after the kings that took over the areas at the time. Now we talk about New York, right? Henry Hudson, remember, he was a Dutch explorer, right? The Dutch were the first ones to find New York, right? And that was one of the first major trading colonies. We talked about them already a while ago. So this is kind of give you just a little bit of a rehashing some information, where he had founded the colony in the early 1600s, okay? Now, when you take a look at what it becomes, New Netherlands ends up encompassing New Amsterdam as well. It ends up becoming New York, and kind of this entire region here, okay? Now, when it officially becomes New Amsterdam, and probably a few more years later on, becomes a major staple of the Dutch colonies of the area, okay? And its perfect location allows it to have interactions basically with all different groups of the area, right? That's the most important thing you have to understand about the Dutch, right? We already knew that the Dutch were only there for trade, right? They wanted to develop their fur trade, very similar to the French, okay? But the difference was the Dutch didn't have a strong enough military to really defend it, okay? So what they originally did and how they divided this was they usually it was almost like a manor system. You know, like how in medieval Europe they had the manors where they had the rich aristocrats had controlled certain areas of a piece of land. Same thing happened here, okay? Now, you don't have to memorize that. This is just a little fun fact about it. But the most important thing to understand is that when the English find out how beneficial this little area is, they do the very English thing and take it over. Now, the funny thing about this is that they actually had given the land to his brother without them actually even owning it. They said, oh, here, I'll give you this gift. Here, bro, here's this gift. Take this area. It wasn't even theirs to give yet. So what they did was they just showed up and took it over, because the Dutch were not even close to the same strength as the English. So it was really easy. It kind of took it over without even a shot being fired. All right. Named it New York after his brother, the Duke of York. Okay. And that was officially a English colony, and now they completely controlled the East Coast. Right. Now, if you take a look at New York City itself, they do have a lot of Dutch influence. A lot of the original buildings there, or if you look at even the architecture is similar to Dutch buildings. Okay, especially when you look at in Harlem, right? Is named, comes from Dutch origins. Okay. Now let's take a look at Pennsylvania. Right, Pennsylvania is a very interesting colony. Right? First off, they're founded by the Quakers, and the reason they got their name was they quaked from religious emotion. You ever see those videos where they get hit with the Holy Spirit and they're like shaking with how much the Holy Spirit has dominated their bodies? That comes from this, right? These people were the same thing, okay? Now, the interesting thing about the Quakers is they have like all these little like fun facts about them, like they have to always keep their hats on. But probably the most important one is that they're pacifists, right? They're against war, okay? Now, this is important because they actually, compared to a lot of the other colonies of the area, were pretty chill with the Native Americans, right? As in, they actually bought the land from them, right? And they didn't actually try to wage war, okay? Now that the colony was founded by William Penn, which is why Pennsylvania, it was named, Penn's Woodlands. That's why Pennsylvania, that's what it translates to, okay? And like I said, he does a pretty good job of kind of keeping the peace for a while. Now, the problem is that it's not his fault why the interaction with the natives got worse and worse. As in, it was the people that came that were not originally Quakers showed up, and all of a sudden, the treatment of natives got really bad, okay? Now, the interesting thing here was that the colony had first started because King Charles had a debt with his father, and it paid off the debt by giving him a colony. So, as you could tell, the English kind of deemed these lands to be almost like property, kind of like an item they can give away to somebody else, not knowing that all these lands were already owned by Native Americans. Okay. So, as I mentioned, they were pretty good when it came to dealing with Native Americans at the time. They purchased the land. They didn't want to fight them. As you already know, they were pacifists. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, people that were not Quakers showed up, started war. They basically were just taking land from Native Americans, and it just got worse from there. And the same trend ends up happening. Whether it was started out pretty good and it only got worse over time, or it was automatically just a really bad interaction with the natives of the area. Okay, and you can tell, and all of you probably know already, that it only gets worse from here. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, Pennsylvania is very interesting because it kind of encompasses a lot of different concepts that were really not really unknown, but are very unlikely at the time. As in, the different diversity of people was probably the biggest thing. Okay, the fact that you had a big influx of Germans in the area, right? That was really a lot where the German migrants went to with Pennsylvania, which you really didn't see that in a lot of other colonies. Also, the idea of religious freedom wasn't really a common thing. I mean, we saw that with Roger Williams, but that was about it. A lot of other people were really, you had to be like a Protestant to be there. But in Pennsylvania, in Rhode Island, that was not the case, which is very rare for the time being. And then the fact that they originally were okay with the natives, they actually had a good relationship with the natives, was also very rare, right? So what is interesting about Pennsylvania in its founding was it kind of encompasses this thing of known as the Holy Experiment, okay? Now, the Holy Experiment is very similar to the headright system, but it also encompassed the idea of kind of pursuing religious freedom and also kind of treating others the right way, right? So it's interesting when you look at Pennsylvania as just one colony because they have all these different ideas, all these different makeups of that colony that are very rare, okay? Now you take a look at New Jersey. This is not going to be as complicated. Basically, New Jersey, they end up basically buying this area, ends up becoming part of, it was originally part of Pennsylvania. They ended up buying the area from West New Jersey and East New Jersey, end up combining to create New Jersey, okay? So this is not going to be too crazy. Delaware, same type of concept. It was actually founded by Lord De La Ware, okay? So you can understand why it's called that. There was also actually Delaware natives, but they were actually a little bit more to the west, so they actually weren't from Delaware. It's kind of funny because I don't know why they similar names. But associated with Penn's group when they first started, basically Delaware was similar to New Jersey in the aspect where they were granted land and the purchasing land and basically just created a stable colony in that general spot. Okay. Now we're getting to really the last colonies, right? Georgia, also known as the buffer zone. Right. Now the buffer zone, the reason why it was named that was because King George wanted to basically have a colony just in case Spain wanted to kind of push the barrier, right? They wanted to try to attack the colonies that they had owned. So Georgia was made as almost a defensive barrier. They'll be the first ones to go, but at least by that time they'll know that Spain is attacking. Okay. And a lot of times they have really, they would always send the people that own debt to Georgia to go work. So this is kind of the spot. Not saying that is their least liked colony, but I'm kind of saying that it was like their most. They didn't really like this colony. They were like, this is like I don't want to use any bad words. The garbage colony. They're like, all right, just put all the people that owe debt over there, just in case Spain wants to attack. They'll deal with them first, but we'll take care of it afterward. Now, when you take a look though at the port of Savannah, it ends up becoming a big moneymaker for them. Right now, it's very diverse because the fact is when you send all the people that owe debt, like really not really criminals, but people that are on the bottom list of people you like to one area, you're going to get a lot of different people, right? And it makes it very diverse. And I think that Savannah ends up becoming a very prosperous city for the time being. but it actually makes them a lot of money. So they end up kind of providing more resources for the Georgia colony over time because they actually realize it is profitable for them. Okay. All right. So with that being said, let's jump into the practice quiz. All right. So we're going to jump into mercantilism probably more tomorrow. So let's go to the AP classroom. Let's check that out. It's not time.